All right, then, good people, welcome back. In this video, we're going to extend our knowledge of elasticity. We've just completed price elasticity of demand, which talks about the relationship, the responsiveness, the connection between the price change and QD. And we're going to jump into the price elasticity of supply. Same basic concept, except now we look at the connection between a price change and the change in quantity supplied. So this is taking elasticity over to the producer side and the law of supply. Let's do it really quickly, dig into it. First of all, a definition: price elasticity of supply is a measure. And specifically, it is a measure, again, of how responsive quantity supplied is to price changes. So again, price elasticity of supply is taking our elasticity idea, our responsiveness concept, and applying it to the law of supply. And we're determining how responsive quantity supplied is to price changes. Now, much like price elasticity of demand, we're going to have a coefficient. So we're going to have a pretty simple formula. To compute it, price elasticity of supply is going to be equal to the percentage change in quantity supplied divided by the percentage change in price. And you see the formula there. You know, we could also say that the elasticity of supply, the percentage change in QS divided by the percentage change in price. And much like we had with price elasticity of demand, we're going to have some categories, some classifications, and a lot of the same rules that we had brought up before, especially about the slope and those things, are also going to apply. So in terms of our elasticity categories, we can broadly say that we're going to have price elastic supply and price inelastic supply. And you can see here that with price elastic supply, first big thing, our coefficient, ES, is greater than 1. That implies that this is a very responsive measurement, that a change in price is going to have a greater than proportionate impact on the amount that is supplied. And you can see here that we're going to have a relatively flat slope. Notice again that what the flat slope implies, we start off here with P1 and we're going to go up to P2. P1 corresponded right here with Q1 and P2 with Q2. And if you notice the relative size of the price increase compared to the relative size of the quantity supplied increase, we're going to see that this is a responsive relationship. And therefore, price elastic supply, ES greater than 1, and a relatively flat slope. On the other hand, we're going to have over here price inelastic supply. And you can see that similar to demand, the more inelastic the supply curve is, the steeper it's going to be. And if we analyze this, let's say that we start off here with P1. So we take our dotted line over, we hit our supply curve, we bring it down, and we see that P1 is associated with Q1. Nothing new there. But now we have a big price increase. This really substantial increase in price from P1 to P2. We go over, we bring it down, and we can definitely see that the law of supply holds. As P has gone up, QS has gone up. But the degree, the responsiveness, the how much question is very different here. In fact, this really, really big increase in price has led to a relatively small increase in QS. It's not responsive, and therefore we're going to call this price inelastic supply. Now, we also have the extreme cases. So much like we had with price elasticity of demand, we're going to have one really far extreme case that would be perfectly inelastic. And you notice that the perfectly inelastic supply curve is completely vertical. And that means that price changes would have no supply on the amount that's produced. On the other hand, as we go along the continuum, we have at the far end perfectly elastic supply. And if you notice here, our supply curve has gone from vertical to horizontal, from steep to perfectly flat. And when we have this flat supply curve, we can see that the quantity supplied is completely and totally responsive to price changes, where even a minuscule change away from, in this case, $10 eliminates all QS. So much like price elasticity of demand, we're going to have the continuum, less elastic, more inelastic, more elastic, less inelastic. You're going to be fluent with that jargon and know those terms are interchangeable. And most critically, you're going to know that we're talking about a continuum. That's going to be measured in part by the ES number, 0 over here, getting greater and greater as we move along the continuum. It's going to be reflected also in the slope of the curve. The final thing to cover right now is to briefly discuss the factors that are going to influence price elasticity of supply. In other words, what are the things that are going to make one item more or less elastic or inelastic? And the key idea here, the real key idea when you're talking about these determinants, these factors, is the terms on which additional units of input can be acquired. Remember, we talked about production, and to produce more and therefore supply more, a firm has to be able to acquire those raw ingredients, that land, labor, and capital, those productive inputs, right? So the key idea behind the price elasticity determinants is, what are the terms in which additional units of input can be acquired? Keep that big thing in mind, and we would have the following 4 broad criteria or determinants. The first one, we would say the time to adjust. We believe that in general, the more time that a business has to adjust, the greater the price elasticity of supply. So we're going to say that more time is going to lead to a greater elasticity. Just as an aside, so that you know, usually when people in business and in like strategy classes talk about time frames for suppliers, there's lots of different ways to break them up, and there's lots of different, definitions based on whether you're in marketing or production or in accounting. But from a really broad lens, we can oftentimes identify 3 kind of crucial time windows. The first one would be what we would call the immediate time window, AKA market day. I mean, you can imagine a guy goes out in the morning on a boat to fish. He wants to supply fish to a restaurant. If he is limited that morning to catching 15 fish, that's the supply for that day. And that market day, that immediate term, is going to dictate how much he can supply. If the prices skyrocket or if the prices tumble, if he has 15 fish that he caught that day, he can't go back out and catch any more, and the fish are going to go bad. He's going to sell at whatever price he takes. He's not going to have a whole lot of alternatives. Then we talk about this idea of the short run, and then we talk about the idea of the long run. So we believe that over time, as we move, or as suppliers move from the immediate market day window to the short to the long term, more time, higher elasticity. Another factor is going to be what we call the mobility of inputs. This question asks, how easily or quickly can resources be moved around? So we would say, can the inputs be moved? If, for example, we're talking about the market for fruit and vegetables, can migrant workers quickly move geographical locations with the seasons? Those are examples of the movement of an input. It's a lot harder to move a capital resource or a factory, but the general idea is, how easy is it to move an input? Tied to that is a third one, We're going to say broadly, the flexibility of inputs is going to be a criteria that determines price elasticity of supply. Whereas mobility meant, can you take an existing input and move it from one productive area to another? Flexibility means, can a particular input serve multiple purposes? If production needs change, can some of the inputs on hand be reconfigured quickly to make the new product? And the final would be, and this is less of a criterion, just more of an identity, is the item in question of a fixed quantity supplied. Suppose, for example, that you're in the market for a Picasso painting, ideally from the blue period. Well, Picasso is dead. And therefore, since Picasso is dead, you would put price and 0 and quantity. And the supply curve for Picasso paintings is going to be here. Picasso is no longer around. He cannot create any more paintings. Therefore, the quantity supplied is fixed. And that's going to have a unique supply curve. That, my friends, is a quick take on price elasticity of supply. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.